What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Wednesday, September 19th, 2018, middle of the weekday, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday, and another interesting weekend of whatever is going to happen next. Okay, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phones, put you on the air with your comments and questions. So let's just get right on into it here. Syria is obviously at the boiling point. A lot of tensions all over the place, a lot of pressure on Russia to take a more aggressive response to the shoot down of the Ilyushin 20. And basically, it's in everybody's interest to de-escalate tensions in Idlib, but it looks like an attack is still going to be likely. Now, Russia and Turkey worked out this temporary solution to create a demilitarized zone 15 to 20 kilometers into opposition-controlled territories along the de facto front line by the middle of next month. And the deal was that all the radical fighters were to withdraw from that demilitarized zone, and all heavy weapons such as tanks and rocket launchers, guns and mortars were to be removed. And of course, everybody understood this was a temporary stopgap measure. It was to forestall an actual invasion of Idlib, which the United States has declared would justify a new U.S. aggression against Syria. Don't you dare touch our beloved Al-Qaeda here. I mean, just because they knocked down the World Trade Towers is no reason for you to go after them. So, unfortunately, there's already a monkey wrench been thrown into the gears because apparently the militants in Idlib have rejected this demilitarization zone plan. So we're back to square one on that with Syria and Russia ready to go on in. And now they're saying that this is likely to actually happen sometime in November, that they're going to go on in and do the mop-up operation and just basically end the war then. I don't know exactly why they're waiting that long, because it gives the militants a chance to regroup, rearm, retrain, reinforce all of their defensive works inside Idlib, but that's the current plan here. As of today, at least according to thedrive.com, Russia and Syria have linked their air defense networks. They're now talking to each other, and hopefully this will prevent the kind of misunderstanding that led to the downing of the Ilyushin 20. Although, again, we're not exactly sure what happened, if it was just an accident, if it was an intentional provocation to try and get a rise out of Russia, but everybody is still pointing fingers back and forth at everybody. But at this point, in answer to the question that was posed yesterday, is this going to harm Russia-Israel relations? Yes, apparently it does, because Israeli ambassador to Russia, Gary Koren, was summoned to the Russian Foreign Ministry following the shoot-down of the Ilyushin 20 aircraft, and basically informed that Russia believes the Israeli pilots set up the Russian aircraft to be shut down, and that Israel definitely deliberately created a dangerous situation. And at this point, they're saying it was a provocation by Israel, and Russia sees Israel as an enemy, at least in Syria, after the IL-20 shoot down here. Now, the war hawks on both sides are saying, yeah, let's get this thing going here. And apparently there is an ex-Russian general is already out there urging Moscow to start shooting down Israeli fighter jets. Now, up until today, probably because of the threat of nuclear weapons, Israel has enjoyed unfettered access to the skies of Syria. They can fly their F-16s anywhere they want to go. They can bomb anything that they want to bomb. They haven't been touched yet. I think at most one plane has been shot down and one has been damaged. That's it. But now the war hawks in Russia are saying it's time to get real here. And there's a very alarming article coming out of Global Research up in Canada saying that a Syrian-Russian victory is the only way to avenge the Israeli and French strikes on Syria. Apparently, that missile barrage lasted close to an hour. So obviously more ships than just that one French frigate had to be involved in there. And I'm wondering if the SSGN was actually part of that. Okay, now Israel has come out this morning with a very arrogant statement. They're saying that they will attack Russian air defense systems in Syria if Russia tries to shoot down Israeli warplanes. Or to paraphrase it, what Israel is saying, we can bomb you, you're not allowed to bomb us, because we'll bomb you even more. And that is chutzpah. I think that's a lot of chutzpah there. All right, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network, and we're going to go ahead and take a phone call from George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? You know the thing, hearing your, I think your Hawaiian senator or congresswoman, I don't know who it was, but she sat there and said that this woman, Christina Ford or whatever, she has to be believed. No evidence, no proof, no vetting, or no nothing. Anybody who makes a sexual allegation against a male has to be believed.
Yeah, and, well, that's all they've got to go on. That's all they've got to go on. That's Mazie Hirono. She's a senator. She's an embarrassment to the state of Hawaii. And I loved James Wood's tweet in response to that. But we're going to be covering Kavanaugh here as soon as we finish the international news.
Well, but anyway, I started up on Twitter. I started the hashtag #WeToo for all the men who had their lives destroyed and their livelihoods stolen because of false accusations. You know, the funny thing is, it was the women who are coming to the defense because they are getting sick and tired of being looked bad. They're getting sick and tired that the real victims can't come forward because of all being clouded by false accusations.
Yeah, that actually happened back in the 1990s when the rape hysteria got cranked up, and they were out there saying, well, we're here to protect the victims. And by the time it was all over and all these police departments had been sued by wrongfully imprisoned men, it actually had the opposite effect. Police departments were less willing to listen to real victims of rape out of fear that they were being bamboozled again.
No, I mean, and you know the thing is, in my case, I was accused of sexual harassment. I mean, they were so willing to believe the victim. I did not have any rights. If I defended my honor, I was a chauvinist. And and finally, after the fact, I looked at the thing, and I could have had my own witnesses to my defense. And this female detective I knew who did sex crimes, that she was willing to go and question this accuser for me. I said, because she sat there and said this investigator was not competent, but that worked for the company. But since she was a detective, she was a little more seasoned. I said she could have got that woman a cave in 10 minutes, saying that it was a false allegation.
Well, you're assuming that this policewoman was unbiased, and during the 90s, there was almost a demand and an expectation that all women unite together and view all men as potentially guilty. And I remember hearing a statement made by a female who worked for the Los Angeles Child Protective Services, literally came on out and said, with all seriousness, all fathers molest their children. It's my job to find out when it happens. I mean, that was the attitude out there. All men are automatically guilty, and Mazie Hirono's going along with that right now. But it's all they've got to play with, because there's nothing to back up this story. It's an accusation only, and accusations are not proof of guilt. I saw an interesting little cartoon earlier today where there's this woman saying, we can't have a man accused of sexual assault upholding the founding principles of our country. And there's a man next to her with a sign saying, you mean like due process and the presumption of innocence?
Yeah, but also I kind of see it's like this, this accusation with Kavanaugh. It wouldn't even touch a grand jury. You know, I mean, you know, it happened so long ago. She don't know when it happened, where it happened. And I know rape victims who know the exact details down to the minute it happened. If this woman was really traumatized, she would have knew every detail of that incident.
You know, I mean, that's the first part where her story doesn't work. There's nothing to go on. Anyway, listen, we're going to be talking about Kavanaugh. We're going to talk about Kavanaugh in depth a little bit later in the show. I don't want to start, you know, shuffling things around here. So we'll get to that in a little bit. George, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go and switch over to Jim in Chicago. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Regarding the situation in Syria, and I really believe that we're going to be heading to a war pretty soon.
Yes.
In Israel, I don't care what anyone says, they need to get bitch smacked because they want a war. They know that the Americans will support them, the French, the Germans, the Italians, everyone in the EU will support them. So Israel feels like whatever we do, no one's going to come after us.
Yep.
So, I really do believe that something will happen pretty soon, maybe by the end of the year. And my question is this: what is Trump going to do, and what are the American people going to do?
Well, Trump's going to go along with it. At this point, he has demonstrated to us repeatedly that he's totally caved on in to the war hawks and the deep state. But as far as the American people, I think at the point where we start hearing there's going to be a new draft, that's when the American people are going to wake up. And people of my generation who remember Vietnam and the anti-war protests back then against the draft, I think that's all going to reawaken, and we're going to be out there in the streets.
I would agree, just like back in the 60s when I was out there. But again, I am really concerned, and I think the average person, they better wake up before the bombs start hitting the fan. So you take care, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot. I mean, one of the things right now is there's nothing about any of this stuff on the corporate media. You have to really dig into small independent newspapers and the foreign press to find out what's going on. We're being conditized again. And the last time we were being conditized, it was in advance of a monstrous false flag attack that launched us into the century of warfare. So I'm obviously very, very concerned. They want us all thinking about Florence and Kavanaugh, and then it's going to be a big bang somewhere here. Getting on back to the situation with Israel and the Aleutian, Israel has changed its story. It's still expressing sorrow over the Russian plane downing, but it's saying Assad and Iran are to blame for the incident because, by golly, if they would just do what Israel is telling them to do, none of this would have happened. And again, it's another measure of Israel's arrogance and aggressiveness. But no, as a matter of fact, Assad had nothing to do with it. Iran had nothing to do with it. Israel was using this plane as a cover to break into Syrian airspace. And Syria's air defenses launched at them, and they hit the Aleutian. It might make Israel realize that their days of flying over Syria with impunity might now be over, that the Syrians and Russians are now willing to shoot at them. And hopefully that will give them pause. We'll see what happens on that. Meanwhile, James Jeffrey, who's the very hawkish special envoy for Syria, is out there saying they're using a new language for the intervention in Syria. They've dropped this whole thing about chemical weapons, probably because they realize nobody is going to buy another false flag chemical weapons attack. He's out there saying the United States will not tolerate an attack, period. And he's saying that any offensive move by Syria is objectionable to the United States as a reckless escalation. Boy, look who's talking. Pot, meet kettle, kettle, meet pot. And he's saying basically that anything that creates refugees or harms innocent civilians will be a signal for a new U.S. aggression in Syria. So yeah, it's on. One way or the other, they're going to get it going. It looks like they've dropped this idea of faking a chemical weapons attack because they're not going to be able to sell it a third time. They're just going to say, we're going, we've decided to go, what the heck are you going to do about it? Now, fortunately, there is an answer to that, because a group of over 40 members of Congress have sent President Trump a bipartisan letter reminding him that the U.S. Constitution requires the president seek congressional approval before taking any military action, whether it's Syria or anywhere else. And that is exactly what the Constitution says. Now, Congressman Justin Amash announced via Twitter on Monday the letter had been sent to the White House. And that is the way it's supposed to work. The president is not allowed to simply declare wars. Under the War Powers Act, which, by the way, is obsolete. Under the War Powers Act, the president can deploy military forces for 30 days to deal with a crisis and an emergency. And after that, he has to go before Congress and convince Congress to move ahead with a formal declaration of war. That's how it's supposed to work. Now, the War Powers Act was actually created at a time when it took a certain amount of interval of time for members of Congress to assemble in order to deal with this kind of a situation. But these days, everybody in the government is instantaneously linked on their cell phones and personal computers and tablets and whatnot. So I don't think the president needs that much time. I think he can deploy forces for maybe a week or two, but after that, if Congress doesn't sign off on it, bring the troops home, and that's the end of it. All right, let's take another phone call. Peter in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. One of the things that has stuck out with me is that just in the last few days, when Russia said that it has called off its Idlib offensive because it's reached an agreement with Turkey about a buffer zone. And I listened to you yesterday, and you made the point where it sounds like Assad would be very mad because it sounds like Russia is surrendering part of Syrian territory in order to get that agreement. And I believe you're right on that, Mike. But this is yet another a very crucial move by Russia, knowing that there's a war coming, because without Turkey's acquiescence to what Russia's doing and participation, by the way, that involves Assad's survival depends on this as well. That's why he might acquiesce to this deal with the Russians and the Turks, because if the Russians can't supply either by air or by rail their forces in Syria, then they're going to fail. They're going to fail, and Assad, of course, will not survive if the Russians aren't there. So I think that was a deal in order to get the Russians access to airways and rail lines and logistical lines in order to supply their forces there. And when you combine that with the integration of the Russian air defense system with the Syrians, they're preparing. They can see that we are pushing, just as you said, and Israel is pushing for war, and of course they'll get it with the United States anyways. They'll get it from the United States. And they are taking the necessary measures, and Assad obviously is willing to, in my opinion, surrender some of his own sovereignty in order to survive, because he sees that threat as that real as well. What do you think?
Again, the issue is, first of all, I have no doubt that Russia is perfectly capable of resupplying their forces in Syria entirely by air if they need to. But again, as I mentioned earlier in the show, the deal that Russia and Turkey came up with is already dead on arrival, because the militants in Idlib are refusing to go along with emptying that buffer zone. So that's already over, and we're back to status quo ante. Anyway, Peter, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. So Syria is this flash pot just ready to go. And we know it's going to go. It's only a matter of time. Will there be a false flag to kick it off? Probably something bigger than a chemical weapons attack. Like I said before, it's worrying me that the corporate media doesn't want the American people to know how tensions are ratcheting up in Syria. So whatever's going to happen is designed to take the American people completely by surprise, maximize the shock effort, and use your emotionality to override your natural skepticism. Meanwhile, over in Iran, the efforts to try and force a regime change there by killing the nuclear deal and squeezing Iran's leaders out seems to have stalled. For example, Trump's scheme to pressure Iran by reimposing oil sanctions is going to produce political blowback here at home in the form of higher gas prices. But apparently over at the Washington Post, Josh Rogin wrote a scoop based on information leaked to him by the administration that Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin is actually blocking Trump from signing the paperwork necessary to impose sanctions meant to prevent Iran from accessing an international banking transaction system. Now, if that were to happen, it would restrict Iran's ability to do business abroad and add another nail to the coffin of the nuclear deal. But Mnuchin may be realizing that cutting off other countries from the U.S.-linked financial transaction system is only accelerating the creation of alternative systems, which is already underway. All right, let's take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, did you hear anything about Russia is going to institute a no-fly zone?
I've heard speculation about it. I have not heard that a decision has been made.
Yeah, from what I've been hearing, that they're going to probably go with it. Now, I don't know what it's going to entail or this or that. You know, I'm not in that room, you know, but yeah, it looks like they're going to have it says for drills till the 26th. Now, that's kind of odd, right? I thought the drills ended.
That is very odd.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to think about that one for a while.
Yes. And Mike, do you see China's dumping more U.S. treasuries? So
yeah.
That's like the count. But the clock's ticking down. Yes, that's what it seems like, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I really don't have much more to say. But if you can check that out a little more on that no-fly zone thing, and then
I'll look at it during this upcoming commercial break here.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
All right, you got it. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia has decided to buy the Iron Dome defense system from Israel. And it's basically signaling that the two countries are, in fact, moving closer together. And Saudi Arabia is clearly moving toward political convergence with Israel. They're both clearly intending to align against Iran, but it wants to reach a level where it purchases heavy and developed weapons from Tel Aviv like the United Arab Emirates does. Now, here's the problem I have with that. The Iron Dome system was developed with U.S. taxpayer money. Israel didn't invest in developing that system. You did. Why is Saudi Arabia not buying it from the United States of America? Not that I'm pleased about weapons of war flying all over the place, but if the U.S. paid for the development of that Iron Dome system, why isn't the U.S. selling it to Saudi Arabia and making the money off of it? I find that a little bit grating, to put it delicately. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia has issued new directives banning up to 300,000 Palestinian refugees in Lebanon from performing pilgrimage. And this is coming out of the Palestinian Institution for Human Rights. The Qatari news website said Saudi Arabia stopped issuing visas for Palestinian refugees in Lebanon who do not hold a Palestinian Authority passport. And the rights group said it was very worried about this quite sudden Saudi decision, calling on Saudi Arabia to identify its reasons. But it's just Saudi Arabia doing what Israel wants them to do. By the way, as another sign of the growing influence of Israel in our society and its propaganda. Schools in the U.S. state of Texas are going to be required to teach students that it is the Arab rejection of the state of Israel that is the cause of all the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. This was voted through by the Texas Board of Education during a curriculum review last week. And they decided to keep this quite controversial sentence in high school textbooks that'll be used by 5.4 million public school children. The board is composed of 5 Democrat members and 10 Republican members. And again, it is not the Arab rejection of the state of Israel that's the cause of all the problem. But the good news is the board voted to remove references to former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton being the first woman to run for presidential office. We got to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And over the commercial break, I did a little searching around. There are 2 different discussions going on about no-fly zones over Syria. One is that Turkey wants to institute a no-fly zone over Idlib itself, which Russia does not want to go along with because they don't have confidence in Turkey's air superiority. So that's probably not going to go anywhere, especially since that whole demilitarization zone deal is already falling apart. The other discussion here is basically whether or not Putin, in order to appease his hardliners at home, will impose a no-fly zone over Western Syria in response to the shoot-down of the Ilyushin 20. Because merely upgrading Syria's air defenses is not seen as really aggressive enough to deal with what happened. But very clearly, Netanyahu's been trying to schmooze Putin for a lot of months now, and all of that was just undone with that one shoot down here. All right, we're going to take a phone call now from Alex in Ontario. Aloha, Alex. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. 3 things. First of all, I want to thank you for covering the news when everybody's just talking about Kavanaugh. And one thing is combining North and South Korea. I think one of the big obstacles is going to be what to do with Kim Jong-un. Like, he really likes being the adored leader of our people, and they all laugh and smile and clap whenever he moves. I mean, what role is there for him in a democracy, really? That's going to be a big thing to overcome. They might have to invent a monarchy or something like that.
Well, we'll let Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in work that out for themselves because that's their job. But at this point, and we're going to be talking about Korea very shortly, it is very clear that I did guess correctly. They're moving to reunify the Korean peninsula. And at that point, North Korea won't need nuclear weapons. The U.S. reason for being there will have evaporated. And there's been some interesting developments along that line.
Yeah, good positive change. And the second thing I wanted to talk to you about was our Canadian negotiator that we sent down to Washington. In case you missed her last week, I can tell you where she was. She came back to Toronto, the Toronto area where her riding is, and she was part of a 3-part keynote panel at a women's conference. And the topic of the panel was dealing with tyrants. And they had very nice intro videos and a lot of discussion and photos of Vladimir Putin, of course, and of course Donald Trump. So right in the middle of negotiations, she backpedals off back into Toronto and plays front and center, basically calling Trump a tyrant. I think if there's one thing I could say to you as a Canadian is the negotiator we've given you is a gift worth billions of dollars to you.
Well, unfortunately, as part of the propaganda process, the leader of any country that you are getting into trouble with is going to be described as a tyrant. But Trump was elected by the American people. He's far from being a tyrant. In fact, he's dealing with a bureaucracy that is in open rebellion against him. And we're going to be talking about that, too, a little bit later in the show. Putin is the elder statesman of the globe. He's the only adult in the room right now. So I don't think that was a good move for your negotiator to make when she's supposed to be the one building bridges between the United States and Canada.
Exactly, and at the G20 conference, or the G8 conference, Trudeau waiting till Trump got on an airplane and start stabbing him in the back was pretty bad too. So it doesn't bode well for Canada. So thanks for your time, Mike, and everything you do.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot, Alex. And yeah, it does seem that the art of diplomacy is fading from the diplomatic process, and people are just relations between nations are getting mean. The whole point of being a diplomat is that you are there to discuss the issues and business, and you're not there to provoke the other side. You're trying to keep things peaceful and calm and businesslike, and we're not seeing a lot of that anymore. Down in Israel, they have now killed 6 Palestinians in 24 hours, one of whom was simply beaten to death inside his own home. Another Palestinian man was shot and killed by Israeli police near the Damascus Gate to Jerusalem's Old City. And he was basically accused of trying to stab an Israeli civilian, but witnesses said that the alleged attacker was trying to defend himself from an attack by a settler. So there we go. Meanwhile, over in the West Bank, illegal Jewish settlements surged by 187%. as Israel starts to talk about formal annexation of occupied Palestine. And that is going to stir up a lot of trouble. Now, Israel is justifying this land grab. First of all, grabbing all the land for the settlements and now simply grabbing all of the West Bank, claiming that it can legislate anywhere in the world. It is entitled to violate the sovereignty of foreign countries, and that Israel is allowed to ignore the directives of international law in any field it desires. This was actually written in an official response letter to the Supreme Court last month. Now, of course, these claims are audacious, and it shows that if there is a tyrannical power anywhere on planet Earth, it is in fact Israel. Now, the background of these statements is this new law which was passed last year, which declares the outright theft of Palestinian land to be perfectly legal. I'm allowed to steal your home. How dare you defy the law? Remember Ahed Tamimi? She went to jail for a little while for slapping an Israeli soldier who had injured her brother. And she's become a figurehead of the Palestinian cause. And Israel, even after letting her out of jail, said, you're not allowed to leave the country. You just got to stay here and be quiet and don't cause a lot of trouble. Well, despite that, she managed to get out of Israel, and she traveled to France last Friday for a public event where she was a speaker asking people to support the Palestinian cause and continue to boycott Israel. Now, she may be in trouble if she goes back to Israel, but I think if she were smart, this would be the start of a worldwide tour, because she's captured the imagination of a lot of people. Over in Yemen, the humanitarian disaster is continuing. There's an NGO called Save the Children, and it says a further 1 million children are at risk of famine. And part of the problem, of course, is rising food prices, and the falling value of the Yemeni currency is putting more families at risk of food insecurity. The other threat, of course, is the fighting around the key port city of Hodeidah, which is the entry point for most aid into the country's rebel-held areas. I wish they wouldn't use that phrase. They're not rebels. They're the people of Yemen who do not wish to have a foreign-approved government foisted onto them. The Houthis are not rebels. The Houthis are Yemen. And as I've mentioned before, all of this began some years back when the United States executed a successful regime change operation in Yemen. They brought down the legitimate government of Yemen. They installed a junta to run Yemen for the benefit of American Western corporations. The people of Yemen decided they did not like foreign puppet rule, and they kicked that government out. It's now deemed a government in exile. And so the U.S. teamed up with Saudi Arabia to go on in and teach those people of Yemen, you do not get rid of your U.S. puppet rulers. You learn to love your foreign puppet ruling government. You don't ever leave the American empire. But more and more of these so-called captive provinces are breaking away from the American empire. And that was one of the phenomenon that signaled the downfall of the Roman Empire as well. But getting on back to Yemen, this charity is saying a total of 5.2 million children in Yemen are now facing famine. Now, mass starvation of a population as a form of collective punishment is, in fact, a humanitarian crime. It's a war crime. Maybe that's the reason why Bolton it's one of the reasons why Bolton is out there trying to basically make sure that no American officials will ever be hauled before the International Criminal Court in The Hague. You know, they're dead to us. They have no right to judge us. We're the exceptional nation. We're above the law. Sounds a lot like that statement Israel made. We're allowed to go anywhere. We're allowed to bomb anybody. We're allowed to ignore international law. Now, this story was breaking yesterday, but it does show that the fortification, if you will, of Europe is continuing. Poland is now offering the United States $2 billion to establish a permanent military base inside of Poland. And Poland is saying it's needed as a bulwark against Russian aggression. And apparently, they made the offer all the way back in May, and the U.S. hadn't really committed to it. So Poland is basically remaking the offer. They want a U.S. armored division, and they are willing to defray some of the construction costs of the base. But the reality is the cost of putting this armored base in Poland on a permanent basis is going to be several $100 million per year. And while Poland's $2 billion may make the initial move a little cheaper, this is going to turn into another costly mission for the United States with no end in sight. And when you consider how many hundreds of these bases we have all around the world, you can begin to appreciate the vast amount of money that this is costing. Now, apparently Japan had a submarine military exercise in the South China Sea, apparently sending China a message saying, just because it's the South China Sea, and just because you spent your money building up those islands down there, and just because at the end of World War II, the Cairo Convention took these islands away from Japan and gave them back to China, doesn't mean they're your islands. So again, this is freedom and navigation exercises, and as long as everybody stays on their side of the line, it shouldn't be a problem. But obviously, all of this military activity on their front door is making China nervous. Let's put it this way. If we started seeing Russian and Chinese warships cruising 12 miles off the coast of the United States, wouldn't we be worried? Wouldn't it look like it was an aggression? Well, you can relax because Russian and Chinese warships are not, in fact, cruising just 12 miles off of our coast. It's the U.S. and their ally ships cruising 12 miles off the coast of the South China Sea Islands and the Middle East. And that tells you who the real aggressors are in all of this here. All right, let's talk about Korea. A lot of interesting developments there. As you know, South Korean President Moon Jae-in, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un met for their third summit. They met in Pyongyang, which really rolled out the red carpet for Moon Jae-in. It was quite a celebration when he showed up. Apparently, he's the first South Korean president to visit Pyongyang in a very, very long time. So one of the things they came on out with it. They made a lot of agreements. And Kim Jong-un is getting ready to permanently dismantle the North's main nuclear complex if and when the United States takes corresponding measures. Now, what those measures are have not been stated, but North Korea has made a lot of concessions, and they're waiting for the United States to show some good faith, like stop those military exercises just off their coast. Now, apparently, North Korea is going to allow international inspectors to monitor the closing of a key missile test site and launch pad, and they're going to once again send a unified Olympic team to the Summer Olympics. And they're trying to host the Summer Olympics in 2032. So they made a major step toward peace. And apparently this nuclear reactor they're talking about is the Yongbyon Nuclear Scientific Research Center. It is a 5 megawatt nuclear power station. It uses fissionable uranium, which means it can produce plutonium, and that's why it's on the must get rid of this list, because plutonium is bomb stuff. But it actually is a power station here. Now, interestingly enough, the North and South Korean defense chiefs signed a military pact with each other. And they're agreeing to halt border drills starting on November 1st. They're going to stop military flights in the vicinity of the demarcation line. They're going to set up a buffer zone in the Yellow Sea and suspend the maritime drills. This is a demonstration of growing mutual trust. And the agreement also calls for the withdrawal of troops from the demilitarized zone and disarming the servicemen keeping watch at the Panmunjom border village, which is called the Peace House, ironically enough. And the nations also agreed that they would close 11 border guard posts by the end of 2018. What just happened here is that North and South Korea just ended the war. And I'm sure the United States is going to be throwing a tantrum and saying, no, 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 you can't end the war. It's not over till we say it's over. It's our war. We paid for it. But that's basically it. They've just announced, for all practical purposes, the end of the state of war. And they're talking reunification. They're moving ahead to reconnect the rails and roads across the border. Kim Jong-un is loosening up the rules for South Koreans to visit their families that they haven't seen since the start of the Korean War. That's what they're doing. They're reunifying. They're ending the war. They don't need the United States to come on in and make it official. Good for them. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, this Salisbury poisoning story gets more and more bizarre all the time here. Now, there is this Russian model who, with her husband, they got sick eating at this restaurant in Salisbury on Sunday. And of course, the media said, oh, it's nerve agent, it's nerve agent, it's Russia, it's Russia. And then yesterday we reported to you that the British authorities had run all kinds of tests all over and said, no, there was no nerve toxin, could be food poisoning. Well, the Russian model is now out there screaming that Putin has been trying to kill her, and this time they used rat poison. And they're just pushing this propaganda. It's really getting silly. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. All right, so let's talk about Kavanaugh. A lot of stuff going on with Kavanaugh. And apparently over on Fox News, 2 women who previously dated Kavanaugh did interviews saying he's a gentleman. He doesn't act like that. He doesn't assault. He doesn't rape. So a lot of people are starting to come forward to testify to his character. Now, as it turns out, Christine Ford is saying she will not speak to the Senate on Monday. And I hope that Grassley carries through with his threat to just cancel the hearing outright. Because as it is now, it's going to be the hearing, it's going to be Kavanaugh. Every Democrat there is going to be on the attack against him. What would be the point of that? Okay. Now, Ford's lawyer is out there saying the FBI should investigate the allegation of this attempted rape all those years ago, and that the confirmation vote should not be allowed to happen until after the full FBI investigation, which could take, 3 to 5 years, who knows. The FBI has already responded saying, no, it's totally inappropriate for Christine Ford to demand that we use law enforcement resources to investigate a 35-year-old allegation when she won't go under oath. She can't remember key details, including when or where it happened. And that really cuts right to the heart of the matter. The FBI has nothing to go on other than she says it was Kavanaugh and he did it. And that's basically it. Now, one of the swing votes that the Democrats were hoping might tip the balance away from Kavanaugh was Jeff Flake. And he's a charter member of the GOP's anti-Trump caucus. And he's sort of been saying he wasn't really sure. And, of course, if he were to vote no, it wouldn't doom Kavanaugh outright, but it would only take maybe one or two more to turn against Trump, and Kavanaugh would be finished. But now Jeff Flake is saying if the Kavanaugh accuser fails to show up, he will support the move to push the nomination forward. So we're starting to see an interesting phenomenon here, in that a lot of the Republicans, the Democrats, were counting on to basically come over to their side. They're starting to line up. They're closing ranks. And I think the reason is because they see just how incredibly silly all of this has been. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be back with hour number 2 and more about Kavanaugh after these few words. And aloha, welcome back to our show. We're talking about Brett Kavanaugh. And yet another witness has turned up. And this is a case of be careful what you ask for, because Dianne Feinstein was making a big stink about how, the hearings on Monday where they're going to try and grill Brett Kavanaugh, we need more witnesses. We need more witnesses. We need witnesses to what a slimeball he is. And she got a witness, but not exactly the one she wanted. When Christine Ford was telling her story, she made reference to a person she remembered at the party as PJ. And this was in her statement she made to the Washington Post. Well, it turns out PJ is Patrick J. Smith, who attended Georgetown Prep alongside Kavanaugh. Both men graduated in 1983. He went public today saying that he has absolutely no recollection of any such party taking place, nor did he ever see Brett Kavanaugh behaving in any kind of a disrespectful way toward women. That he never saw any signs of assault or anything like that. Now, Susan Collins, who is another one of the major swing votes in the Kavanaugh confirmation, has come out saying she is not buying the timing of the Kavanaugh accuser's 36-year-old claim that he raped and nearly killed her. She's not buying it. She's not going for it. So it looks like she's going to be voting in favor of confirmation. And yeah, it was just too convenient. It was too Me Too. Let's see. There was pardon me. I'm taking a look at this. Oh, this was the same story all over again. Now, Christine Ford, as her story and her credibility crumbles, is now trying to play the victim card again. And Kavanaugh's, Christine Ford's lawyers told Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley that the professor has been forced into hiding. She's been forced out of her home because of death threats from those Trump supporters. So she's playing double victim here and trying to basically take the focus off the fact that her allegations against Kavanaugh are just not credible. And I'm not surprised that the FBI turned her down flat. There's nothing to the story. She doesn't remember who drove her to the party, whose house it was, how much she had to drink. She's been confused on how many people of various genders were there. And by the way, there was no actual rape. It wasn't, according to her, it wasn't completed because of the second boy in the room. Now, Hawaii's Senator Mazie Hirono is out there saying men should just shut up. You should just, shut up. Just believe her. The accusation is all the proof of guilt we need. We know all you men are guilty, so just shut up and do the right thing for a change. And actor James Wood came out with this amazing Twitter response in which he said, "There are hallowed American cemeteries around the globe filled with men who did the right thing, you sexist witch. Go blank yourself." And that tweet went absolutely viral. And way to go, James. Now, I do want civility to come back into the public discourse, but civility's got to be on both sides. And when you have Mazie Hirono out there, trying to verbally chastise men into going along with believing Christine Ford just because she's a woman and you're all men, that's ridiculous. Even Hillary Clinton is getting into this thing. She came on out saying that Kavanaugh's accuser deserves the benefit of the doubt. You should just assume she's telling the truth, until somebody can prove her wrong. Just assume that Kavanaugh is guilty. And of course, there's nothing Kavanaugh can say or do to prove that he's innocent, which is exactly the way the Democrats want it. It's exactly the way the feminists wanted it back in the 1990s. The accusation is equal to guilt. Well, frankly, if Hillary Clinton is supporting Christine Ford, then we know that she is full of crap, in my book. Now, as it turns out, Christine Ford's lawyer, Deborah Katz, was a fundraiser for the Hillary Clinton presidential campaign. This came out of the Podesta files at WikiLeaks. She was an early fundraiser for Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign, and she raised over $29,000 for Clinton. Boy, somehow we sort of knew Hillary's fingers were going to be in this somehow. But Katz is a donor to liberal causes and candidates, including the campaigns of Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Move On. Meanwhile, Hillary's people are targeting Dean Heller and Cory Gardner to flip on Kavanaugh. Remember earlier in the week I said there's got to be a lot of pressure being put on moderate GOP to flip. And apparently Hillary Clinton loyalists are looking to peel off moderate Republican Senators Dean Heller and Cory Gardner in their effort to stop Donald Trump's Supreme Court pick, Brett Kavanaugh. And they put together this makeshift liberal group, We Demand Justice. They're running anti-Kavanaugh ads in Alaska and Maine to pressure Republican Senators Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski to back off their support for the nominee based on Christine Ford's accusations, which have no support. Unfortunately, Alaska may vote against one of the senators in Alaska may vote against Kavanaugh, not because of the accusations, but because of pressure from Native Alaskan groups who do not like him. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. So, former Hillary Clinton campaign spokesperson Brian Fallon highlighted a key piece of the Democratic strategy. We Demand Justice is also running ads in Nevada and Colorado aimed at Republican Senators Dean Heller and Cory Gardner, the latter of whom supported Marco Rubio in the GOP presidential primary. And Gardner supports Ford being heard, and he did push to delay the confirmation vote, which, as of the last word, will happen tomorrow. and they are expecting major riots, protests, organized protests around the Hart office building, possibly the Capitol building itself. So it's going to get ugly here. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network here. Donald Trump is out there saying that exposing the corrupt FBI probe would be the crowning achievement of his presidency. I agree. Yes, it would, because he hasn't really achieved all that much else. But Trump did an interview with Hill TV talking about his ordering the release of the unredacted classified documents in the Russia collusion case to show the public the FBI probe started as a hoax, and exposing it all could become one of the crowning achievements of his presidency. And Trump also said he regretted not firing former FBI Director James Comey immediately instead of waiting until May of 2017. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Trump is out there saying the declassification order will expose the FBI's insurance policy from the Strzok page texts. And this is coming from Devin Nunes, bolstering Trump's claims it was a rigged witch hunt. But there's already a problem with it. And this could trigger a constitutional crisis. Pelosi, Schumer, Schiff, and Warner are demanding that the Department of Justice and the FBI defy Trump's classification order. This is an attempt to undermine the president and his authority over the executive branch. Remember, Pelosi, Schumer, Schiff, and Warner, they're over in the legislative branch. They're not supposed to do anything over at Department of Justice or FBI. That violates the separation of powers doctrine. But these high-ranking Democrats have sent this letter literally containing an order to these intelligence agencies and the Department of Justice to ignore Trump's order to declassify these documents. Gee, I wonder if they're hiding something. As it turns out, the FBI and the Department of Justice are already dragging their feet and saying they can't release or they won't release the totally unredacted documents. They're going to try and reach a compromise with Trump over what redactions may be left in place. Frankly, I think Trump needs to start firing people right the heck now. This is ugly here. Greg Jarrett is out there saying that if Rod Rosenstein defies Trump's order to declassify documents, he should be fired, and I agree. You know, part of the problem right now is that we have these government officials, FBI officials, Department of Justice officials, they automatically declare that everything crossing their desk are matters of national security, and they're trying to classify everything, even if it really does not need to be classified. So, and again, I hope the American people are paying attention to this, because it does show that our government has become dysfunctional. When you have members of Congress ordering the FBI and Department of Justice to defy the president, to undermine his authority, the government is breaking down. It's coming apart at the seams. Donald Trump apparently in an interview on The Hill was saying that he doesn't have an attorney general. He's not happy with numerous things. And he refuses to say whether he's considering firing Sessions, but he should have started firing a lot of these people a long time ago. Now, George Papadopoulos is out there making the rounds and was being interviewed by Martha McCallum on the story, saying that he's now come to the conclusion that he was being set up with this series of foreign meetings in order to create a pretext for a U.S. probe into alleged Russian collusion. And he's hinting there is more information to come. All right. Now, this is one that's going to rile you up. This is a video over in Illinois, was posted on the Gateway Pundit. And this Illinois Democrat Party leader is literally telling voters to cheat. And he literally said, vote early, vote often, whatever you can get away with. I shouldn't say that, but I really don't care. They're not even trying to hide the fact they're going to steal the election this November. And Trump better start doing something about it, or he's going to lose the Congress. And that'll be the end of all these investigations. They'll try and impeach him over some trumped-up charge. They're already talking about going after Pence because they're hoping that if they get the House of Representatives, that'll be a Democrat as Speaker of the House. And if they can get Trump and Pence out of the Oval Office, then they'll have a Democratic president to go with their Democratic House of Representatives, and the liberal agenda will be assured. And half the crowd goes wild. Over at Project Veritas, they've released the next chapter of their video on the deep state unmasked. This one involves leaks at Health and Human Services. You saw the one, probably the first one, about this Department of Justice official is resisting from inside. They had this other one out there saying he's literally on company time, on taxpayer time, using his office to push the socialist agenda. And the Department of Justice has responded to the video saying the allegations are deeply concerning and they are going to refer this to the Inspector General. So, anyway, it's just nasty. And once again, they had that comment in there about, hey, we can't get fired. It's almost impossible to fire a federal employee, so we can do whatever we want. And that may be what's wrong with the federal government. When somebody decides they're going to just sit there and read porn on their computer or use their taxpayer-funded computer for electioneering, they can be chastised, they can be demoted, they can be moved to a new department. They can't be fired. They don't lose their job. The protections for federal employees are just so great. After a while, they're going to get this attitude of immunity, invulnerability, if you will. Okay, over in Chicago, little bit of good news. Remember, there was this construction project that was going to basically commandeer a huge part of Jackson Park, which was originally claimed to be the presidential library for Barack Obama. Then it came on out that Obama had pulled a fast one, that his real library was going to be elsewhere, and the planned building in Jackson Park was going to be an Obama center to sort of celebrate the fact that he had lived there for a great amount of time. And the local citizens were up in arms. They liked Jackson Park the way it is. They didn't want to give up all that ground for what is essentially a monument to one man's vanity. But it looks like the people are going to win out on this one because the city and the Chicago Park District have announced a halt to the Obama Presidential Center construction. And it was still under review, but basically the Park District was already cutting down trees despite this federal lawsuit. And they hadn't even gotten the approvals from city and federal agencies. Even the Obama Foundation CEO had pledged to keep the trees intact until the permitting process was complete. But no, they went on out there and just cut all the trees around here. That created a lot more controversy. So basically, the city's decision to stop the work came after a meeting with the National Park Service and the Federal Highway Administration. So it looks like Obama is not going to get his monument after all. Now, Charlie Daniels, very well-known musician here, came on out saying that America is in the throes of a bloodless revolution. This is very similar to the story that Paul Craig Roberts came out with the other day about how we're virtually in a civil war. We're just not to the point of using rockets yet. And Charlie Daniels is out there basically saying, you know, our government was set up to serve all the people equally, to give preferential treatment to none. They were never meant to be politicized for the use of the executive or any other branch to further political agendas or personal vendettas. And his concern is that he is seeing how we are being driven into this liberal socialist system by the liberals and the deep state. And they're willing to basically do whatever they think needs to be done to get that, including getting rid of Donald Trump here. Okay, as you know, there's a lot of pressure being put on us in the independent media. And it turns out now the corporate media, for all of their cooperation and support for the official government story, they're coming under surveillance as well. And apparently there is a new scandal erupting involving documents that were released by the Freedom of the Press Foundation and the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia University following a Freedom of Information Act request, basically confirming that federal officials can spy on American journalists using the FISA court, on the theory that sooner or later American journalists will call somebody in another country. And this is being done to basically deter journalists from daring to be critical about anything the government does. Be careful what you write. We're spying on you. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to talk about the economic news right now. The trade war is continuing to amp up. China has now set tariffs on $60 billion worth of U.S. goods. This is in response to the U.S. announcement of tariffs on $200 billion in Chinese goods. And if the U.S. continues to raise its tariffs, China promises they will respond in kind. And here's something we all ought to be thinking about. Obviously, all these tariffs are going to mean higher prices for the American people. And it's not going to take very much more of these tariffs to completely erase, possibly even reverse, any benefit the middle class may have gotten from last year's tax cuts. The benefit is going to be gone because of the tariffs here. Meanwhile, China continues to cut U.S. Treasury holdings as the trade war intensifies. And China's ownership of U.S. bonds, bills, and notes slipped to $1.17 trillion, with a T, the lowest level since January, and down from $1.18 trillion in June. So they're letting them go slowly. But if they were to dump them on the market all at once, they could actually inflict a lot of economic damage on the United States here. China has announced they will not weaken their currency to help exporters amid the trade war. And basically, it's an implicit rejection of Donald Trump's claim that Beijing has been manipulating its currency. So China is saying they will not engage in any form of competitive devaluation of the exchange rate, and that the decline in the yuan was caused by economics and was not a deliberate move. Meanwhile, Venezuela is going to significantly increase their oil exports to China. And remember, we talked about how China was all of a sudden investing a lot of money in Venezuela to help them get through this economic crisis, and they're getting a lot of oil in exchange for it. And Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro is saying additional Chinese investment will help boost oil production and exports. So they're putting the money to good use, and they're going back to being an oil exporter. And of course, that is a big reason the U.S. wants to bring Maduro down, because Maduro is accepting the yuan for the oil. He's refusing to go through the US dollar, which is what this is really all about. Over at Danske Bank, their CEO has been forced to resign over a money laundering scandal that has grown to $234 billion. And apparently the U.S. had launched an investigation. News of that broke last week. And the amount of money being laundered just keeps growing and growing and growing. And apparently there were shadowy figures in the former Soviet Union were laundering the money through Estonian banks with the assistance of Danske Bank. So once again, we find out proof. Jesse James was right. The bankers are the real outlaws. Okay, up in Seattle, we're having another one of these controversies. Seattle can't afford to fund the arts. They can't fund housing. They can't even fund their tourism agency, but it managed to scrape up $135 million to repair the Mariners Stadium. And there are a lot of people who are really wondering what is going on, because the owners of these teams that play in these stadiums, they're all billionaires. Why can't they build their own stadiums? Why is it always dumped on the taxpayer? I mean, it's a great revenue generator, selling tickets and TV rights, but it should be handled as a business, not as a public charity. Over in Chicago, they're starting to ask, if Chicago can't even fund their pensions, how's it going to fund a universal basic income for the masses? Because they've been playing with that idea already. And by the way, it's been tried a couple of places already. They have to pull the plug. They simply run out of money. Up in Vancouver, there's a disturbing trend taking place. Apparently, unable to afford the rents up there, some Vancouver seniors are committing suicide rather than become homeless. And I can actually understand why they might feel that way. But again, I think the real measure of any society, how civilized and humane it is how they treat the most vulnerable members of that society. And we're seeing more and more governments around the world just completely turn their backs on the homeless, the hungry, the elderly, the ill, the disabled. It's a very, very, very dark time. Apparently, central banks worried about the strength of the US dollar are back to buying gold again, which hopefully will push the price up. For some reason, the price of silver is down. But hang on to those coins and bars. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And getting on back over to Poland, which is trying to get a permanent U.S. base built in their country, which will cost us a heck of a lot of money. He's out there saying that Donald Trump ought to put a stop to the Nord Stream 2 project. And he's out there saying that Donald Trump can make a decision that would bring the pipeline project to a complete halt. We're not sure what that decision is, maybe bombing it. But saying basically if the Nord Stream 2 project is completed, and as Hungary has requested, it reaches into Europe, it would be economically harmful to the United States because large volumes of Russian gas would be on the European market, and they would not be inclined to buy U.S. liquefied natural gas. So the leader of Poland is now messing about with other countries' economic means here. Turning to immigration and the refugees, Angela Merkel is out there saying that Britain must suffer, for what they're doing regarding Brexit. And this came on out the same day that Theresa May warned members of Parliament that her for Chequers proposal is not supported in the House of Commons. Great Britain will face a no-deal Brexit. And a lot of people are saying that might be a bad thing, but a lot of people are saying the Chequers deal is just another giveaway. It keeps Great Britain shackled to the EU. It's a Brexit in name only. Now, the people of Great Britain want to be free of Europe, and I think they're probably mostly willing to deal with a little inconvenience during a no-deal Brexit. And I also have absolutely no doubt it's not going to take very long for other deals to be made. Donald Trump promised he would make deals with Great Britain after Brexit. I think we can count on him. I think he's going to keep that one. But you know, there are countries in the European Union that are going to be all set to make trade deals with a newly independent Great Britain. Brussels may try and put a halt on that, but Brussels right now is dealing with a great deal of resentment within the EU because of the economic hardship that they're all using. They're all going through right now here. This story is absolutely disgusting. It came out of Natural Blaze. And apparently one of America's largest egg producers was caught using child slaves. And that's not bad enough. The slaves were provided to them by the United States government. And apparently there was this human trafficking ring that took advantage of immigrant children and forced them into slave labor. Now, 50-year-old Pablo Duran Ramirez Jr. is the fourth person to plead guilty in the case, which involved a number of children being forced to work on the egg farm. He faces up to a decade in prison at his sentencing come January. Now, according to the court records, a labor company named Haba Corporate Services, owned by Ramirez, arranged for trafficked immigrants to work with Trillium Farms, where they were physically threatened and forced to live in horrible conditions. Trillium reportedly paid Haba $6 million for the immigrant workers who were promised that they would be provided with jobs and education when they got to the States. Some of the workers were only 14 years old. Now, there's another good reason to shut that border down. I understand that this kind of abuse of children takes place in other countries, but to see it here in the United States, child slave labor in the United States, it tells us our civilization is in decline. It's falling right in front of us. Over in Germany, the Iraqi citizen who was a suspect in the murder of Daniel Hillig in Chemnitz, which sparked a huge outcry, has been released from custody. Apparently, there is a lack of evidence saying that this particular individual, Yusuf A., actually committed the murder. It may have been somebody else. And there were no witnesses that identified him as the perpetrator, and they couldn't find his fingerprints on the knife. So they're back to finding out which of these other refugees, did this to us here. Getting on back to Malaysian Airlines Flight 17, Russia has released yet more data showing that Ukraine was guilty of the shootdown. Now, earlier we had reported how Russia, based on information that was released by the Dutch investigation, were able to identify serial numbers on two components of the Buk rocket that is alleged to have shot down Malaysian Airlines Flight 17. And because the Russians are excellent record keepers, they were able to basically track the history of that specific Buk rocket and confirm it was manufactured in Russia, transferred to Ukraine before all this brouhaha began, and was never returned. So Russia's paperwork documents that missile that hit that plane had to be fired from Ukraine. Now they've released an audio recording that they claim belongs to Ruslan Grinchak, a colonel of the armed forces of Ukraine. And this guy was responsible for controlling airspace in the zone of the military conflict in the Donbass. The man in the recording says that we can make another airplane disaster to repeat. Now, this conversation took place in 2016 in the Odessa region of Ukraine during the preparation of the Malachite radar station used to detect and escort air objects. The man's voice that supposedly belongs to Colonel Grinchak says, take this supervisor, take Levchuk, and say, boys, if this is going to be like this, then we will blank another Malaysian Boeing. So it seems like a lot of people in Ukraine's military think that Ukraine shot that plane down. Meanwhile, Kiev has been very uncooperative with the Dutch investigation. And the Dutch government has ruled out any dealings with the insurgency over in the eastern Ukrainian provinces, but they haven't gotten a lot of cooperation from Kiev. Kiev refused to call a halt to the fighting so that inspectors could get to the crash site. Anyway, this is another cover-up. It's another cover-up, another attempt to bash Russia. I don't know about you. I really get sick and tired of being lied to so much. And yes, I know they're lies. I'm not falling for the lies. But it's still insulting. It's disrespectful. Now, last week when we were watching Hurricane Florence beat up on the Carolinas, and they're still in a world of hurt down there, there was another incident up in Massachusetts where there were multiple gas explosions in 3 different towns, Lawrence, Andover, and North Andover. And it came on out that somehow the gas mains had become heavily overpressurized, which broke connecting hoses in the homes. They filled with gas, found an ignition source like a pilot light, and literally blew the house up. And to nobody's surprise, lawyers have now filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of people who were forced out of their homes for days when dozens of these gas explosions happened. Now, this lawsuit is the first of what's likely to be several filed against Columbia Gas and its parent company over the explosions, which killed 1 person and injured more than 24. And it accuses the utility company of negligence, and it's seeking psychological compensation for residents of the towns who had to evacuate but did not suffer injuries or damage to their homes. Personally, I think that's a little inappropriate. I think you ought to take care of the people who lost their homes first, and the family of the 1 person who was killed, was a teenager. So that really is ambulance chasing, I think, here. Okay, remember the story about Amber Geiger? She was the police officer who admitted to shooting 26-year-old Botham Jean in his apartment for apparently no reason. Now, Officer Geiger claims that she accidentally entered the wrong apartment and shot a man who she thought was a burglar. However, there is eyewitness testimony that contradicts her original statement. Now, despite admitting to killing an innocent man and having her initial statement contradicted by witness testimony, Geiger is being treated as more of a victim than a killer. In fact, police never searched her apartment for any kind of evidence. And she was basically allowed to, leave the apartment, go down to the police station, no search at all. And by not searching her apartment immediately, police ruined the investigation, making it all but impossible to prosecute her. At the same time, of course, they were searching the apartment of the victim, and they found a small amount of marijuana, which they used to try and smear the poor guy and make him seem less sympathetic. Oh, he had marijuana. Yeah. He was a criminal. It's a hardened criminal. We got to do that. Okay. I think it was yesterday we were talking about this investigation by Al Jazeera, who had found that the Long Beach Police Department officers were using this Tiger Text phone application. And what it does, it sends messages back and forth, which after a set interval of time are completely erased from the memory of the phone, so that even a forensic analysis of the phone will not be able to recover them. And it caused a huge stink over the implication that police were using these things to communicate so there'd be no permanent record of possible misdeeds on their part. Well, the story went viral, and the Long Beach Police Department has announced they are suspending the use of the Tiger Text phone application, or at least that's what they're saying. Anyway, okay. The United States of America is one of 45 countries infected by ultra-powerful Israeli smartphone spyware. And it infects Android and iPhone, and it's been found floating around the United States, as well as these other 44 countries. This is coming from a company called NSO Group, which is an Israeli company. And the malware is called Pegasus. Now, officially, NSO Group says that this is only being sold to law enforcement agencies in order to use for law enforcement. But apparently, it's being found on the phones of people who've committed no crime, including political activists, people who write dissenting opinions. So it's being used to spy on people who have not committed any crimes. And this is a professional spyware. It costs, I don't know exactly what it costs, but it's not cheap. But apparently it can hide on Apple or Google devices. It can spy using the camera, listening in on conversations with the microphone, steal your documents, and siphon off once private messages, amongst other surreptitious activities. It's completely out of control. It's completely out of control. And the hard part is, even as we have courts around the world, like the European Court, just ruled that all of this surveillance is a violation of privacy laws, you can see these heads of agencies and police departments stand up and say, oh, we promise we're not going to do it anymore. How do you know? How can you really know? When I was a kid and just getting into computers, it was all there for you to look at. One of the things I really loved about the Commodore VIC-20, which I still have, is you could go anywhere in the memory, and if you could disassemble the machine language, you could see how everything worked. And there was also this really cool feature that simply by turning the computer completely off and completely on, it was reset to its factory condition. Any viruses or any malware that were in there were completely erased. There was nowhere for them to hide. These days, we're getting into a situation where more and more of our systems are being locked away from us. Ever since the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, it's actually illegal to go on in and look at your own software on your own devices, whether it's a tablet, a smartphone, even your automobile. So it comes down to a matter of trust, and I don't think there's a lot of trust left here. Long Beach Police Department can say they're not going to use Tiger Text anymore. We don't know that, unless we follow the police officers around and peek over their shoulder. We can have GCHQ say that, yeah, we're going to stop spying on all those European citizens. We don't know that they have. There's way too little attention being paid to all this covert surveillance on behalf of ordinary people knowing what's going on. There's big money on spying on you and very little effort to protect your privacy. It's open season on computer users, both for government and for the cyber criminals who are running rampant all over the place. So we're coming up here on another commercial, and let's throw the phone lines open, 800-313-9443, and get some phone calls in here for hour number 3. Meanwhile, in yet another privacy violation alert, Google has now admitted to changing phone settings remotely. this affects the Android users, where the basically the battery saver setting has been turned on remotely without the phone's owner's permission. Now, battery saver is a nice thing to have, but it really should be up to the owner of the phone, not Google. But it raises the question, what other settings can Google do remotely to Android phones? We're going to take a break for commercials. Join us on the air. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And I can see we already have callers waiting on the line. But before we get to them, I want to get through this other story here. I made an oblique reference to this in the last segment of the program, where the European Court of Human Rights has ruled that Britain's mass collection of everybody's internet communications data violated privacy, which is guaranteed in the European Union Charter and various other laws, failed to provide sufficient safeguards to protect that data from malicious use. And if you think about it, this is a complete vindication of Edward Snowden. Because when he came on out and said the U.S. and British governments were secretly collecting and storing mass amounts of our private communications data in violation of the Fourth Amendment and without a warrant. And we know all of the Five Eyes nations are doing it, and probably a few more countries as well. This vindicates Edward Snowden. Little bit of good news. Up in Alaska, 3 men have been sentenced to 5 years of probation for operating what was called the Mirai botnet. And of course, as you know, a botnet is a network of devices that have been compromised. They're controlled from a remote location and used to do denial of service attacks or various other issues like functions like cryptocurrency mining. And apparently this Mirai botnet was rather large. So they grabbed these guys and they gave them probation. I would have thrown him in the hoosegow. It's time to make an example of the cyber criminals here. All right, let's start with a phone call. Mateus in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, not that there is anything wrong with mining cryptocurrency, but what they were doing is mining cryptocurrency without your permission on your computer. So
yeah, that's what they were doing. It's one of the things they were doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to say that I followed up your reference on air of a YouTube channel called No More News, spelled K-N-O-W,
yes.
No More News,
Yep.
And that's Adam Green. So that was a good reference that you made there, and so now I'm watching you and him. I talked to, and he has a bit more time to go into the Israel topic a bit more than you do, because you're also covering the daily current events,
yes.
Which he's not doing as much. So it's like going one level deeper into it all. I find it really fascinating. Turns out that there is a plan to blow up the Dome of the Rock, most likely, build a third temple, and actually rule the world from Israel, and each one of them are going to get 2,800 slaves, and that's you and me. Not everybody believes that, but there's a powerful group that does have a lot of control over the official policy of Israel, which affects foreign policy for a lot of other countries. This is insane. They actually are planning on they think we're all just their cattle, and that all the wealth in the world actually belongs to them by divine edict.
Yes.
Wow. It's just shocking what we're actually up against. And it would be just amusing if it was just a small little radicalized group somewhere. But these are the people that are actually having all of our NSA surveillance go directly to them unfiltered first, so that we can all be blackmailed.
Mateus, I got to put you on hold. We got to do station identification. Don't hang up. I'll come right back to you after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're talking with Mateus in Canada. Yeah, I mean, I know a lot about what you're saying, because my first wife was Jewish, and when she told me some of this stuff, I thought she was pulling my leg. But yeah, their religion does teach them that God has exposed all of the money to them, and anything that they can do that gets that money in their hand is considered blessed. Another thing that she told me is that the 10 Commandments only applied to other Jews, and everybody else was fair game. And I don't know, maybe, of course, all religions contain violence. All religions contain some real absurdities. The question is how many people actually believe it. But of course, Israel's government does use the religion for political purposes. They use archaeology for political purposes. Blowing up the Dome of the Rock, trotting out that red heifer that they've already announced that they've got, and starting to build what would actually be the fourth temple would probably drive the entire region into war.
Yeah, and the red heifer, for people that don't know, is just a reddish-colored cow. Is that correct?
It's a calf, yes, but it has to be perfectly red all over, and it's considered an omen that it's time for the kingdom of Israel to rise.
Right, and call me a conspiracy theorist, but I would lean towards believing that that's genetically modified, that this is completely artificially being constructed, just the same way that there's these biblical references of the number 6 million that are just being completely set up to be 6 million when they're not. But it's really, what's creepy about this is that it's a nuclear powered nation who's demonstrated, the will to just mass murder people and lie about it, like the Lusitania had involvement in 9/11, who has, with AIPAC, huge funding issues with our president, Sheldon Adelson. The people, Netanyahu being the president, is in on this stuff. So it may be a relatively small amount of extremists that believe that Israel is going to rule the world from Israel and we're all going to be their slaves. Which, by the way, the reason everything's kosher, all this kosher food all over the planet, is like they think that they're going to be running the planet soon, and they want to have their food ready for them. It's just ridiculous.
Well, the reason there's kosher food all over the world is because there are Jewish people all over the world, and Israel's government would love for them all to move back to Israel to deal with the demographic crisis here. But
my theory is more juicy. I like mine. It's more.
Yeah, I think your theory is more juicy, but I think it's kind of hanging out over the edge at this point.
Okay, hey, so forget about that. Oh yeah, just everybody check out No More News. Young man, humble, the opposite of an Alex Jones in every way. They just had a good debate, Adam Green versus InfoWars. It was very interesting, and so. That is it. I forgot my other point. Have a great day.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Al in Canada. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I hate to backtrack, but I just wanted to call up about, you said, the older computers were so simple, and it's true. And because they've become more complex and faster, obviously more intricate software can be used, such as, what Windows 10 has done to their operating system, or should say Microsoft has done to Windows 10 operating system. As you know, every second Tuesday is updates, right,
yes,
for Microsoft. I allowed mine to go through Thursday night, and I woke up and the updates bricked my computer. I just built it at the beginning of June. It was like $3,000 Canadian, state-of-the-art computer. And so, I restored my backup image that I had made a couple of weeks before. And Mike, within seconds of booting, it was starting again, the updates. So I had to jump through hoops. I don't know whether you have any experience with Windows 10 or trying to stop updates. There are two services running for updates in Windows 10. And just going in and shutting them off and disabling them doesn't work, because they will start up right back up again in manual. I went through the group policy editor, and finally, the only other thing that would work to get them both to stop is editing the registry, which a lot of people wouldn't do. But it's not so hard. You just create a new key and a new D word.
Yep.
and give it a value. But my point is, this operating system was determined to do to me again what it had done before, and it blows my mind. And here's another one, Cortana. The only way, Mike, that I could ever stop Cortana from not running was to actually physically rename the folder in the system apps.
Yes.
And in order for that to happen, you have to first take control of the system or specifically that folder. You don't want to do the whole C drive. It can create a lot of problems, but you have to actually stop that service and be ready to hit enter or rename, to rename that folder. And it's just insane what they've done, to make something that shouldn't be that awful, just awful.
Well,
it blows my mind.
It is awful, and they're trying to force it on everybody. They're getting ready to end support for Windows 7 and Windows 8. You will take your Windows 10 and you will love it. I've had two experiences with Windows 10, and the first one involved one of the computers that I use to support my wife's choir. Play MIDI files and audio playback and all that other thing. And when they were giving Windows 10 away for free, I said, okay, it's not a critical machine. I'm going to let it go through the update, which it did. And all of my wife's music files on that machine were erased. Not put in the garbage can. They were literally blanked from the disk for some reason. And it had to do, there was some message on the screen about managing your media, and you will keep your MP3 files here. And Microsoft, over the last several operating systems, has started to adopt an attitude of, we know what you need better than you do. We know what you want better than you do. So just, lean back and trust us, and we're going to turn your computers into this content delivery platform, along with, of course, spying on you for the government. And that machine was so bad, and the option to revert back to the previous operating system did not work correctly, and it left the machine crippled. I literally threw it in the trash bin. I walked outside and spoke several obscene words and threw it in the trash bin. But I now have a laptop that came with Windows 10 installed. And I'm trying to give Microsoft a fair shake. I really am. And I don't have a lot of time to spend with it, but I'm beginning to understand how things work inside there. But like those live tiles they have all over the front of the screen, those are all going to people who want to sell you things. And it took me a while to figure out how to just basically, get rid of them and try and get this machine working for me rather than for corporate media and Amazon and all the rest of it.
You just described it perfectly, Mike. That is, you open up, Windows Explorer. It's not my computer anymore. It's my PC, but that's not even a part of the, what you would see. And you have my music, my documents, all that jazz, and that's where they want you to put all this stuff. My favorite folders, and they monitor this. They monitor all this stuff. And if you made little recent changes, they highlight it. I had to install a separate piece of software to give me the classics, start menu again.
Yes.
And by the way, when it did, install the updates, it not only did it wipe out my restore points, Mike, it stops this system restore. It shut it off. So that's how devious they are. They're doing this on purpose. This was not a mistake.
I don't think they're doing it on purpose. I think, first of all, the original interface change was back on Windows 8 when somebody got the bright idea that they were going to have the exact same interface on the Microsoft phone, the Microsoft tablets, and the desktop PCs, which is a dumb idea. You use those three devices for three different things. You shouldn't have to be forced to use the same interface. And it was a really bad concept, but Microsoft didn't want to admit defeat, which is why they kept the live tiles in Windows 10, even though they went back to a more user-friendly, traditional user interface. But I think a lot of it is just sheer incompetence. The core of the software is just so huge and unmanageable. Microsoft they're letting these things slip through, and there have been a lot of cases where updates do in fact destroy the machine, and Microsoft will say, oh well, we're sorry, take it over to Geek Squad and they'll get you back up and running. But I think it's all about money. They don't want to hire more quality control inspectors. Their attitude seems to be, we're going to put this stuff out there and we'll wait for the customers to complain and then we'll fix it, which is good for Microsoft and bad for us. And a big part of the problem is that in the early days of computers, IBM and Apple and some of these others, Commodore, got together and they lobbied the U.S. government for the end of product liability, indemnification for product liability. And their rationale was, this is going to be a huge industry someday. Right now, it's very small and it's very fragile. We don't know really what we're doing. We could make mistakes and get sued out of existence. And Congress voted that through. And from that day to this, and you'll see this in the end user license agreement if you ever actually read all the way through that thing. You're not allowed to sue these computer companies or software companies if their product misbehaves. There's absolutely no guarantee. And if there's no financial incentive for them to make sure the stuff is perfect going out the door, inevitably it's not going to be perfect going out the door.
No, it won't. And, there are a lot of people that can testify to that. Just another quick point. The two advantages of using Windows 10 are, one, DirectX 12, if you're a gamer, or, you do, you know what I mean. But the other thing, and this is what I love, is the sound support. 192 kilohertz, 24-bit. And, Mike, it's if you're using your video card as your sound card, and you actually have, the Dolby Atmos sound system set up, it is just phenomenal. It sounds absolutely great. Back in the olden days, it was the difference between, DTS and Dolby Digital. Like DTS sounded way better, obviously a larger file size.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
It is amazing. So, if there was something else out there that could do both of those things, I'd switch in a heartbeat. I really would. So, anyways, I appreciate your time, Mike. You have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. But as I've mentioned many times before, I don't play computer games other than flight simulators, so I'm not into that whole thing here. What I've noticed about this Windows 10 laptop is it is very, very slow, and a big part of it is, yes, it is constantly updating whatever it's doing. All right, let's do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who have rejoined our program, and we're going to go back to the phones to Brian in Nashville. Aloha, Brian. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, how's it going, Mike? You doing all right, man?
Doing okay.
Hey, I'm not. I don't listen all the time. I don't really have the opportunity to, actually. And I was just wondering if you had ever got into what's going on with the nanotechnologies.
Well, when it first came out, it was hyped a lot, as most new technologies are. But for the most part, it's failed to live up to most of the promises that were being made. Nanotechnology has basically confined itself to engineering of certain molecules, but the much hyped nano machines just never really worked on out. And I think a big reason for that has to do with the bearing surfaces of the moving parts, which you cannot get smooth because they are, after all, bumpy from the underlying molecules.
Oh, I see what you're saying on that. I was just wondering because, I've seen and talked to some ex-military people, and they were saying we had these little miniature bugs that were actually cameras that could latch on to planes and stuff and hear everything going on inside the cabin.
Well, they may have that, and I know that's called nanotechnology, but originally nanotechnology, the term meant technology that existed at the nanometer scale. But there's been a lot of cool work on, miniaturization.
I was thinking, that maybe some of the computer, some of the computer functions in the small little dragonflies with cameras in them are kind of nano, because it'd have to be ultra small, computer chips in those things, keep them light enough to be able to fly, I think. But I was just wondering about that, because I was going to see if you'd ever heard about people having all this nanoparticles inside of their body.
I've been hearing stories about how certain pharmaceutical companies are experimenting with nanoparticles as drug delivery devices, and obviously.
Well, they've been. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I would like to sort of hold off until the technology matures, because pharmaceutical companies have a bad habit of putting stuff on the market before it's really ready and really tested. So I think we need to be very, very cautious about that.
They've been doing that for several years now. Now, what I was talking about, there's these things called Morgellons coming out of people's skins that look like wires that is on video, and it's visibly coming out of people's skins. And I'm surmising that it's actually them building antennas inside of us, because my understanding is nanotechnology is where they can assemble something just using a high frequency radio wave, or perhaps an ultra low frequency wave.
I have a different theory about Morgellons. And I covered this many years ago when it really was a problem. Apparently, it's not the problem it used to be. But somebody actually took some of those fibers that were growing out of people's skins and did a DNA analysis on them and discovered it was plant DNA. And so my theory is that Morgellons may have been the first genetic engineering accident, where something got on out there and was contaminating these poor people. And I remember when it came on out, the official response was, oh, it's all in their head. They're just scratching themselves. There's no such thing as Morgellons. And it basically reeked that something was being covered up. Anyway, listen, Brian, we're going to let you go here. And we are going to start with Al in West Virginia. And Al, I'm probably going to have to take you through the commercial break. What's on your mind?
Hey, I have a quick question. I've been wanting to ask you for a long time. I just thought I'd go ahead and call in and get it over with. When people do these commercials or documentaries or, things like that, especially even documentaries, why, since you was from, you worked in Hollywood and stuff, why do they have music in the background? And
love the music and turn it up. I still see that today on TV commercials all the time. It's just somebody's skill set is lacking.
Yeah, I've seen it, especially on the internet, when you try to listen to a documentary or somebody trying to explain something. You know what I mean? It might not be called a documentary, but when they're trying to make a point, and I noticed that they do that, and that just frustrates me so bad. I can't.
Al, I'm sorry to cut you off. We got to take a break for commercial. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to take another call from Dustin. Apparently, he's got a response to our comments about Morgellons disease. Dustin, you there?
Mike, that is plant DNA, but can that be a response to like genetically modified foods per se? You know what I mean? Because I saw pictures of like zoomed in, and it does show like plant growth in people's arms and on their hands. So that's got to be something like with genetically modified organisms, right?
Well, what I think happened, first of all, this all happened way before GMO foods were approved for consumer use. In fact, it happened back in the days when they were just starting to begin playing around with this technology. And again, this is just a theory that I have. If you look at where more gallons broke out, it was in small, tightly confined areas, out in agriculture.
Yeah, Mike, was wheat the first genetically modified? Like corn wasn't; it was wheat, right? The wheat we eat today is not the real wheat, right?
I don't know the order which they were developed. I think I thought it was the corn came first, the Roundup Ready corn, and it was followed very quickly by the wheat. But again, along with all the other downside, the glyphosate and the high licensing costs for all these seeds, these GMO crops have not produced the wondrous yields that were promised. That was the whole selling point to begin with. We have modified these crops so that you only need to use one weed killer on them, and you will get more crop as a result. But they actually have been performing very poorly. For one thing, the GMO varieties of these crops are less resistant to changes in the weather than the natural varieties, which is what got those poor farmers over in India in trouble with the BT cotton. Because the BT cotton turned out it was less resistant to drought than the natural variety.
Yeah, Mike, what's scary, like, though?
Everywhere now. They're finding trace amounts of it in food. There was a big stink over this a company that was putting out these supposed organic, healthy snacks, and glyphosate was detected in that. It's really all over the place. And the problem is the World Health Organization has said this is a probable human carcinogen, and we're becoming saturated in it.
And it's not Monsanto anymore, it's Bayer of Germany, right?
They bought up Monsanto, but apparently they have the same problem up in Canada, where they've got this independent Canadian lab has demonstrated that glyphosate is actually a common hidden ingredient in children's snacks and lunch foods sold across the nation. Now, maybe it's being, at the supermarket, they'll spray the produce aisle with glyphosate because in addition to being a weed killer, it's also a preservative. It makes the produce last longer. And maybe that's the reason why it's being put into snacks and candy bars to increase the shelf life. But isn't
it amazing, Mike, like one Monsanto, like what a scam. I mean, yeah, it used to be. I mean, I live on 6 acres, so we planted stuff, a long time ago.
Yep.
And over time, the nutrients in the soil would deteriorate. So
that does happen.
But now they die off after one time, and you got to go back to them to buy another treatment. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's like a medicine. You got to go back to them for another treatment.
So you're using GMO seeds?
No. This was a while ago. This was natural at the time, when we were, we don't farm anymore.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, I got to let you go. We're going to take a commercial break, and I've got enough news here to get us to the end of the show, so we'll be right back. Aloha America, welcome back to our show here. And somebody just emailed me. They're using Windows 10, and apparently there is a fresh start feature where you go to settings, update and security, recovery, and they say it basically, something, let me try this out on my machine before I recommend it for you. All right, we're going to take one more phone call, then we're going to close the phone lines here. Layla in Ontario, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, aloha, Mike. First, I apologize for my voice. I had a cold for a few days.
Oh, well, feel better.
On the subject of GMO. Pardon?
I said feel better.
Thank you. On the subject of GMOs, I don't know if you remember, I mentioned that when I was in Bethlehem, one of my cousins said that they were astonished at how Israel was providing them with so many fruits and vegetables, and they all looked so wonderful. They were so perfect. It's only in retrospect that I realized that, and this is only a guess, I have no verification, but I suspect that GMOs were first developed in Israel, and my guess is that they were using the West Bank. Then they started exporting it and exporting the technology as well. And as for what was first, I believe soybeans. I know in Canada, soybeans were first because it was from the rapeseed oil, and that's how canola oil is developed. And then they went to corn because it's used as biofuel, and also cattle feed. And one of the first to ever warn the world about the dangers of GMO was, I can't remember his name exactly, but I think it was Arpad. He was a Hungarian, and he was working in a Royal Scottish laboratory. And he revealed that the rats they were feeding GMO potatoes to were growing oversized organs and were dying from that.
Yep.
And of course, he was drummed out of the business. He was a highly respected scientist, but he was drummed out of the business. I never heard or saw his name again. So whistleblowers are rarely rewarded. That was the start of the way of introducing detrimental effects to the human populace globally, along with all the other factors, so that no one item is ever identified as being responsible for the deterioration in both health and intelligence or cognitive abilities. And I still point my finger to ground zero, Israel. That's just my suspicion. And I if we were able to get the information, I suspect it could be confirmed. But anyway, that's all I just wanted to contribute. Oh, remember when we talked last week about Great Britain?
Yes.
I did a little bit of research. I should do that before I talk. Great Britain is the correct name. However, it's very rarely used. Even the British refer to themselves as Britons. But it actually was first called Great Britain, or Britannia Megala, Britannia Major, by the Greek-Egyptian geographer and mathematician Ptolemy, who lived in Alexandria.
Yes.
He was the first to identify it as Greater Britain versus Smaller Britain, which was Ireland. So it was never really, and Great Britain includes England and Scotland and possibly Northern Ireland, although that's not certain. But 26 of the 32 counties in the island of Ireland are part of the Irish Republic, which is an independent sovereign state, as many people know. But so I was partially right, but you also were, so I owe you an apology.
Well, don't worry about it. It's a trivial matter. And I always follow the rule of the 5, which is if it's not important 5 years from now, it's not important today, so just don't worry about it. Getting on back to the issue of the produce that comes out of the West Bank, you need to remember that it's always been a very fertile area. And before the founding of Israel, Palestine was world famous for the fruits that they would export. Because they were beautiful, and so it's always been a very productive area. And I look at all of these different things that are causing harm to the human population, like vaccines and GMO foods and so forth. I don't think there's a deliberate plot behind it. I think it's just an epiphenomenon, if you.
I agree with you, and you're absolutely right. That's why even from biblical times, from ancient times, the region of Palestine was known as the land of fruit and honey. It was always a highly fertile area, and that's why so many people from the eastern part of Asia came to that region. But when I was there in the late 80s, these were fruits and vegetables that were being brought and sold in the Bethlehem open-air markets from Israel, and they were astonished at the comparison. But little did they know how they were being grown. And my suspicion is that they were being used as a live laboratory. But when they were able to control their own land and their own farmland, yes, the fruits and vegetables coming that were grown in the area of Palestine were astoundingly healthy. I mean, that's where agriculture was originated. And then as people migrated to Europe and the rest of the world, they brought with them the technology. of agriculture. That was 10,000 years ago.
Yes.
So, and that's why it's always been called the Fertile Crescent. So yes, and it's been ruined. I mean, we've in just 100 years, we've lost thousands of years of human know-how. But anyway, thank you for letting me chip in my 2 cents.
All right. Well, thank you for the phone call, Layla, and I hope you feel better. And we're going to close the phone lines now because we're getting close to the end of the show. Okay. The Democrats, the anti-Kavanaugh camp, if you will, are getting more and more desperate, and they've come up with another witness. This is a former schoolmate of Christine Ford, who wrote a Facebook post saying that she recalls hearing a rumor about an alleged assault when she was in school. Now, the woman is Christina Miranda King. She works as a performing arts curator in Mexico City, and she was a couple of years ahead of Christine Ford. But Christina Miranda King is saying that, yeah, there was buzz going around, but few indirect details. And she says she did not know Christine Ford personally, and she has no first-hand information. But, you know, Christine's vivid recollection should be more than enough for us to truly know the accusation is true. Boy, talk about a reach there. Now, apparently this Christina Miranda King has taken her Facebook post down now. And it's just getting absurd out there. And you know, we're still seeing all these politicians out there screaming, the FBI's got to investigate, the FBI's got to investigate. Well, I'm going to let you in on a little secret, okay? The FBI doesn't have jurisdiction over a sexual assault case that happened in a single state 36 years ago. The FBI doesn't come on in until there's a crime that crosses state lines, okay? Until then, it is a matter for the local police, and the local police were not called. And it was 36 years ago. And it really is absurd. I mean, just for a moment, let's stipulate that Brett Kavanaugh and this girl were at a beer party, underage drinkers, while they were in high school. And if you remember your own time in high school, you know how things can get wild. And if that is the only thing he has done wrong in his life, we're very lucky to have him on the Supreme Court. But personally, I'm going to tell you right now, I do not believe Christine Ford. I think this was all ginned up. And what's really interesting is that this call for an FBI investigation, it's sort of backfired on them. Because everybody's saying, look, Dianne Feinstein got this accusation back last July. It should have been made public then. It should have been sent to the FBI then. And a lot of Democrats are starting to say, Dianne Feinstein has flubbed this one. You know, she messed it up. Yesterday, she was out there making an off-the-cuff remark saying that she's not sure that Christine Ford's stories are 100% accurate. And, of course, she got slammed for that. So today she's out there saying, oh, yes, she's absolutely credible. I believe that, you know, Brett Kavanaugh is an absolute slime ball. But it looks like more and more of the moderate GOP senators that the Democrats were hoping to sway are falling in line behind the GOP leadership because of how badly the optics on all of this looked. Anybody who's my age or older, they're saying this is Anita Hill all over again, where they waited till late in the confirmation process to spring this sexual assault story. And because the American people have lost all trust in politicians, the assumption is, yeah, they're all lying. They're all lying. Okay, getting on back to the computer area here. CNN is now reporting that the U.S. military has been given more authority to launch preventive cyber attacks. Pay attention to that word prevented because that's key. And the Pentagon is referring to this new stance as defend forward. And the strategy will allow the U.S. military to disrupt or halt malicious cyber activity at its source, including activity that falls below the level of armed conflict. What they're talking about is unprovoked cyber attacks against other countries. And it's been signed off on by Defense Secretary James Mattis. So, when they say preventative war, what they really mean is we're going to attack somebody who has not attacked us just because we think they don't like us, which now pretty much amounts to pretty much all the world, I think. But again, remember how we were lied to about Saddam's nuclear weapons. That was supposed to be a preventative war. No, it wasn't. It was an invasion. They invaded the country, they looted the wealth, they lynched Saddam Hussein, and the place is now a wreck. Here in the Pacific Basin, we have what's called the Ring of Fire, which is the edge of the Pacific tectonic plate, and it's rumbling back to life. There was 19 quakes in the space of just 24 hours, and the USGS is finally starting to back off its claim that seismic activity and volcanic activity are not on the increase. They're saying that, yeah, it does look like it's amping up a little tiny bit. Well, there may be a very good reason for that. Remember the other day, NASA confirmed the Earth's surface is in fact cooling. Well, that means that all those tectonic plates are shrinking a little tiny bit, which is reducing pressure on the faults and on the subduction zones where they can now slip a little more easily. I think that may be an aspect about what's going on. Out in California, there's this doctor who appeared on the Bravo reality show Online Dating Rituals of the American Male. His name is Grant William Robichaux. He's 38, lives in Newport Beach. And he and his girlfriend, Sarisa Laura Riley, have been charged with drugging and sexually assaulting 2 women. But investigators are saying they think there may be a lot more victims. Now, apparently this reality show surgeon and his girlfriend, they're very good looking, and apparently they were up at Burning Man looking for potential targets. But Orange County District Attorney Tony Rakaukas said in a news conference that women might have felt a false security around the pair because they are so clean-cut and good-looking. Which, yeah, that people, unfortunately, have been brainwashed into thinking that wearing really nice clothes and having a good hairdo and, you know, being all gussied up with the makeup somehow makes you a more moral human being. No, it doesn't. Think mafia dons or drug lords. They're dressed beautifully. They're not nice people. Over in Montana, they've had another case of a state crime lab worker testing positive for the drugs that they were supposed to be testing for. And Derek Thrush was the lab worker, tested positive for meth through a drug monitoring patch last month. I guess they had decided he was suspicious anyway. In fact, his attorney is trying to claim it's a false positive, saying that the patch could have picked up the drug's presence on some of Thrush's clothing that hasn't been washed yet. But the judge didn't order Thrush back into custody, but instead there need to be more tests to find out what's going on. They can't keep their own people in line. It's amazing here. Now, the church's sex scandal is continuing to explode, this time in Brooklyn. The Brooklyn Diocese in New York City has agreed to pay $27.5 million in damages to 4 men who were repeatedly raped by their Catholic teacher as young boys. And the victims are unnamed, but the diocese agreed to pay each of the victims a sum of $6,875,000 each. And the church where it all took place has since been shut down. But again, it was a case of the church knew something was going on and didn't do anything. We got to take a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. I have talked many times about how there are components put in products because it makes them more profitable, or the manufacturers think it makes the product seem more attractive and will sell more. And one of the chemicals that you need to be concerned about that is in common use in American manufacturing is sodium lauryl sulfate. And it is a toxic chemical. It's used in a lot of cosmetics. And now it turns out Kleenex tissues have it at very high levels. It may be used to make the tissues feel softer. The problem is that sodium lauryl sulfate, when inhaled, can cause a sore throat and a cough. So what happens to people who have a cold, like Layla, and they're using Kleenex to blow their noses? They're going to stay sick. They're going to feel like they're sick for far longer. They may even go back to the doctor and say, prescribe me something. But it makes money. And that's all that counts. Getting on back to the Syrian situation, apparently hundreds of Syrian refugees living in Lebanon are now returning home. It's a mass return from the capital, Beirut. They're returning back to their homes and villages that have been freed by the Syrian army. And the reason this is significant is because it totally undermines this propaganda we've been hearing about how the people of Syria live in terror and fear of Bashar al-Assad, that he's going to kill them. Obviously not if they're going home. Boy, oh boy here. Now, the Secretary General of Lebanon's Hezbollah resistance movement has accused the United States of prolonging the life of Daesh terrorists in Syria in order to beef up the U.S. military presence in the Middle East. In a televised speech, Syed Hassan Nasrallah stressed the U.S. has created the Takfiri terrorist group and provided it with every support it needs. Yes, he is telling the truth on this. We've been documenting that, going all the way back to before the consulate in Benghazi was attacked here. So I was just getting ready to put up a story here, and I'm going to put it up as soon as the music starts playing. This is being posted on Reddit. Apparently, YouTube is currently mass censoring and deleting videos of the 2016 election night meltdown, where you remember how the Democrats were just crying and they were angry and just really upset. And so the call has gone out on Reddit to try and download and save as many of these videos as we can, because when you go to those videos now on YouTube, you're getting corporate media content. In fact, YouTube is rapidly turning into just another version of the corporate media. You know, go to YouTube, you're going to get Fox News, you're going to get CNN, you're going to get MSNBC come up at the top of any search, which to me makes it pretty much useless. Because the reason we're online, we're on the internet, is because the corporate media cannot be trusted because of all the lies and propaganda that we're seeing. I think YouTube is going to hit a real problem because people are going to stop using it. I mean, I've stopped using it. I know I still have videos over there, but as soon as I get set up with a different video platform, I'm going to transfer them all over. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here, get something useful done with the rest of the day. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he has lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everyone that you know. Do it through email or face-to-face. Bring back the sneaker net. The social media has been totally compromised at this point. It's useless for anybody who wants to know the truth about what's going on. If you're into funny kitten videos, yeah, a good place to go. So we will be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.